Alexander, so let me a little bit introduce our webinar. So today is the fourth webinar on our 4Wave initiative, started with Alexander Chikunov. And I'm happy to open up this webinar. And today's topic is urbanization in general. And by urbanization, a lot of experts and scientists and government leaders, they mean different things, but Alexander will give exactly understanding of urbanization and roots of the urbanization and the biggest trends and why urbanization so big power and why urbanization mean much more than just one another city or just one more uh, airport or big transition or suburban and etc. So Alexander, please share with us all insights what we get in our 4Waves approach.
Hi everybody. Yeah, today, as Ainar said, I will tell you about the urbanization, one of the 4 or 5 the most important parts of the more global process I am talking about in my course. The process of mega transition or the great transition of our humanity, of our civilization, from agrarian era to modern era. And the modern era have many characteristics, and one of the most important of these characteristics is urban era. We could say that we are living for the last 250 years in this mega trend, which is one of the most important trends in our life. But we don't see this trend because it's a huge. This trend now passed 250 years, and I think that it will take another 100 or maybe 150 years. So it's a 400-year trend, which if you don't see this trend, if you don't understand that this trend is the main power in our life, the main power for most countries, for most businesses, for most people at the earth, this process this process brought us the prosperity for many nations, but not for all, and brought a lot of problems, and many of them are now called in global problems, like climate change, like resource scarcity, like problem with deforestation, and many other issues. And all these problems, which now exist like independent, so it's like they happen like, okay, it's a problem of water scarcity. Okay, we need to do something with water scarcity. But if we don't understand why it happened right now, we don't understand how to treat this problem. But to understand it, why it happened right now, we need to look back for these 200 years, because everything what now is like a problem has a roots in these 200 years of transition of the first wave countries, first of all, and the second wave countries, like I call them. And I divided all the countries for 4 groups of countries in terms of a stage of this mega transition where they are staying today. This is important because the first wave countries started this mega transition 250 years ago, as I said, and they mostly finished this process. And some of them finished this process maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, so they finished it. They now 100% finished this mega transition, and they are 100% modern countries, modern economies, modern standards of living, and so forth. But these countries mostly, we know like Western countries, but the Soviet Union was in these countries, and Japan was in these countries, but maybe the last one, but nevertheless. But the second wave, and if we look at this process, and we could see these 5 different sub-transitions and sub-processes inside the mega transition. I told you about the demographic transition, like in the in a previous webinar. I told you about the dietary transition, which had happened in many countries, but which will continue in many other countries. And today I will tell you about urbanization process. And the next webinar, I think I will tell you about energy transition process. And if you look at each of these transitions, you could see exactly the same situation. The first wave countries started the transition for each of these directions. So dietary transition, demographic transition, energy transition, urbanization transition, industrialization transition. They started 200 or 250 years ago. So that means that at the next 150 years, by the mid of 20th century, they mostly finished all kind of transition. They passed through the demographic boom, they passed through the urbanization boom, they passed through the industrialization boom. So, and they now in a very high level of living standards. The United Nations and the World Bank called them developed nations. But why the other nations are not developed like them? Because they didn't start this transition 200 years ago. In the mid of 20th century, the second wave countries like Brazil, Mexico, many countries from Latin America, like China, Taiwan, Thailand, Singapore, and South Korea, and Vietnam, and many, many other countries in Asia started the same transition. They were completely urban, completely rural, agrarian, non-industrialized. They had a poor diet. They had a GDP per capita around 1,000 to maybe maximum 2,000 per capita. So they started from a very low level, like the first wave countries started 200 years before. This is historical or evolutionary process. And the second wave countries started the process of urbanization, like a part of mega transition between like 1950 and 1980. So it was like 60 years ago only. And during the next 60 years, they made the huge jump in urbanization, like the first wave did for during like 150 years. But if we look today at the world, we could see that the first wave countries has a percent of urban citizens like more than 75%. There are two main thresholds for urbanization process in the world. One level is like 10-20%. This is the beginning level. This is very typical level of urbanization for countries which still are in agrarian era. And even now in the world, when we have 8 billion people, 4 billion people are living in the countries with the level of urbanization and with the stage of mega transition about 20-30% only. So that is why every time I'm saying, I could predict for sure for the next 50-80 years for most countries, the main trends, how they will develop, because we know that they for sure will need to go through the demographic transition, through dietary transition, through urbanization transition, through energy transition, everything. So the third wave countries, and one of the most important in these third wave countries is India. They still now are in the level of 30% of urbanization. And the second level countries, which started 50 years ago, they had a urbanization, the percentage of urbanization like 20, 30, and 40% 60 years ago. And now, many of them, like Brazil and Mexico, they are leaders in this, in the second wave. They have a level of urbanization 80% and 90%. So, and China, like a biggest country in this second wave, has a level of urbanization 60%. And when China started 40 years ago, the percent of urbanization was about 6%, 6% in 1950, 6%. It was about 60 million urban dwellers in China 70 years ago. So in these 70 years, China moved 1 billion people from agrarian era or from rural area to cities. So that means that the China built cities and buildings and technosphere for 1 billion urban dwellers. So if you realize it, it looks like they've built for the last 60 years, maybe even for 30 years, because they did a huge construction jump in the last 30 years only. They've built about 100 cities like New York or Moscow with a 10 million of population for the last 30 years only. And but the third wave countries has a level of urbanization now 30%. And many of countries from this third wave has a 20%. So that means that we know for sure that for the next 50 years, these countries will move another 2 billion people from rural area to cities. And these cities will be constructed. And the fourth wave countries, mostly I combine the countries from sub-Saharan Africa, but not South Africa. South Africa is a different country. It's a part of the Western world, Western civilization, yeah. But most countries in sub-Saharan Africa are from the fourth wave. And the sub-Saharan Africa has now, most countries in sub-Saharan Africa have now the percentage of urbanization around 10%, 6%, like China had 70 years ago. And the leading country, Nigeria, has now around 50%. So this is one of the biggest countries in the world and the biggest country in Africa. But what that means that we know for sure that that in terms of urbanization for the 21st century, we understand that the second wave countries like China and many countries from Asia, which have still now 60% level of urbanization, they will continue this process. And around 500 million people from a countries of second wave will become the urban dwellers, 500 million. And 2 billion people from the third wave countries will become the urban dwellers. And at least existing 500 million of rural population in sub-Saharan Africa now will become the urban dwellers. So you could see that we know for sure that about 3 billion people from existing 8 billion without population growth will become urban dwellers in the next 50, 60 years. That means that countries and the governments in all these countries have a very hard implementing goals. They have a goal to build technosphere, all kind of infrastructure for at least 3 billion people who will transit from rural area to urban area in the next 50 years. That is why we know for sure that we will at least double or maybe triple the consumption and the production of all kinds of construction materials, like gravel, sand. This is like the traditional, so-called the traditional materials. But more important, we will double or maybe triple in the next 80 years the production and the consumption of the most important materials for building, for urbanization: steel and cement. If we go back, steel and cement, yeah. And the important thing is that if we double or triple the production of steel and cement because of the necessity to build another technosphere, we have now the 4.5 billion people like in urban area. And we know that in the next 50, 60 years, another 4 billion people will become urban dwellers. But in most countries, there are no cities for these urban dwellers. So these cities should be constructed. And the factories which will produce steel and cement for this huge construction work should be constructed too. So the interesting thing, if you look at the world like total, you could see, okay, in the year of 2000, there was the steel production was about 800 million tons. And then it doubled in 20 years. And you say, oh, it doubled. That's interesting. But what about the future? Will it double again? And then if you look at the world like one piece, you couldn't understand why it doubled. But if you look at the level of countries, you could see that this doubling was the case of a China urbanization. China became the producer of the same amount of steel and cement, even more than 50%, maybe 60 or 70% for several materials for the last 20 years. But if you look deeper, you could see that most countries in the second wave did the same because they needed steel and cement to build this urban infrastructure and cities. And the third wave countries, they don't have enough steel factories and cement factories, and they will build it in the next 20 years. And the fourth wave countries will do the same because they can't build cities without these materials. And these materials are very bad for climates. They are polluting a lot of greenhouse gases. And steel production and cement production separately produce now around 10% each. Steel production is a little bit less, cement production a little bit more, but we know for sure that this amount of pollution will double or maybe triple in the next 80 years. And the problem is that techno-optimist doesn't understand, because the many people from the venture companies, because they invested in these technologies, or innovators or inventors, they're talking about the new technologies which we already have, the new technologies for steel melting or for cement production, which are not polluting the greenhouse gases. But they could not imagine that the demand for these materials is so huge today. And in the next 30, 40 years, until 2050, 2060, 2080, every year, the world will need more and more steel and cement right now to build these new cities for the new urbanized countries. So that is the big mistake in the minds of people who are thinking that we could build right now the new steel companies and the cement companies without polluting the atmosphere. We can't. Even if we have the innovation now, even if we have the new technology, it takes a lot of times, and it takes a lot of times to make it economically efficient, technologically
stable.
Stable, and then to spread this. But if you look at this process, what had happened like for the last 30 years, you need to understand that at least 50% of the world capacity of steel and cement production was built during the last 30 years. That means that investors invested billions of dollars to build these factories, and these factories are very new. So these investors are expecting to return on investments for the next 50, 60 years maybe. they are not ready to close these companies because they pollute the atmosphere, of course. But this is the huge combination of different factors, which are very complicated to understand if you don't know all the aspects of this problem. And I will give you a little bit more specific data about, and maybe I will even show you the, yeah, the some several graphs I did for you. Yeah, and I did some slides and some graphs, and as I said, the process of urbanization started from very low level. Usually it's like 10% of urbanization at the beginning. And at the end, the urbanized countries have a 75, 80, and 90, and 100%. Like, for example, Singapore. So small countries have, many small countries from the first and second wave have now like 100% of urbanization. And the interesting thing is, you need to not to forget about this. When people are moving from rural area to urban area, that means another important shift or transition. That means that the less and less people who are still living in the rural area, including farmers, have to produce more and more food, because in agrarian era, nobody produced food for selling. Yeah, everybody produced food for themselves. So they are working in the fields, they are producing cereals and some simple like roots and so forth, and they eat it. But in new economies and in the modern countries, most part of the people are living in urban areas, and so they buy food in the supermarkets. So that means that less and less farmers, and it started from 60% of rural people, then 30%, then 20%, and now in the first wave countries, only about 2% of population produce enough food for other 98% of non-farmers. So that means that productivity of agriculture during this mega transition increased significantly. What I said in the previous webinar about feeding the world. And one of the most important foundations for this were and are two main hydrocarbons: oil, like a diesel for tractors and all kind of machinery which work in the agricultural sector, and electricity. And when we are talking about electricity, the important thing we need to understand about the next urbanization stage is a so-called cooling problem, or the problem of cooling the new urbanized countries. This is the interesting point, because if you look at the world map, you will see that the second, the third, and fourth wave countries are located in the hottest zone of the Earth. It's a tropical zone between 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. And this zone is very hot. And so people need, for sure, air conditioning for living in the cities. If you don't have air conditioning in the cities, in the temperature like 100 Fahrenheit or like 400 or 3500 in Celsius, so you couldn't survive. That means that we know for sure that from now, from existing 1.5 billion air conditioners, we will see in 20, 30 years, more than 5 billion, maybe 6 billion air conditioners, because these countries, which will pass through this urbanization process, will buy, or not countries, but citizens and commercial buildings and so forth, they will buy air conditioning. Even more important, there are so-called mobile air conditioning in our passenger cars and a different kind of buses and public transportation and everything. So according to, if you look at this from the point, again, from the point of climate change and the problem with climate change, you will see that the main part of F-gases are 20, 30,000 times more aggressive in terms of warming effect are coming from these mobile air conditioners, because these air conditioners produce or are leaking, and they have F-gases like a cooling gases. And if you look at the countries from third and fourth wave, you need to understand another important thing. They are started from agrarian agriculture infrastructure. So they don't have tractors, they don't have fertilizers, they don't have refrigerators, they don't have industrialized food system. It's not agriculture in the first wave, it's the whole food system. And the farming is a small part of this system. Then you need to save this food. You need to send it to the storage, to refrigerator, using these refrigerating cars, refrigerating facilities, refrigerators in supermarkets, and refrigerators in any apartment and any new house. So we know for sure that the number of cooling appliances will raise at least for 5 times in the next 20 years, 30 years, by 2050. So air conditioners and refrigerators. And many experts is calling it like the new global threat for the climate. Because if you look at this figure, what they found from the Birmingham University data, so they calculated then in 2050, only these cooling appliances, like mobile air conditioners, stationary air conditioners, and refrigerators, all kinds of refrigerators, will consume about 20,000 terawatt hour per year of electricity. They need 20,000 terawatt hour of electricity every year. But now in 2018 and 2019, the whole world produced about same amount of electricity. So that means that we understand that this urbanization process, and this not only urbanization, but this dietary transition, this mega transition in the second half of the world will lead the demand for energy, for construction materials, for refrigerators, for steel, for cement. And we need at least 2, and sometimes in some position, maybe 3 times more all these kind of goods for the next 30 years. And we understand that this is unstoppable. We couldn't say that, okay, maybe India will not develop. No, we are interested that India will develop. So India now has about 300,000 megawatts of power plants. But India has almost 1.4 billion people, like China. But China has 2,000 terawatts. So that means that China has at least 6 times more power plants and produce and consume like 6 times more of electricity, having the same size of population. And if you look at the documents of Indian government, you see that according to these plans of Indian government, they understand that they need to urbanize for the next 30 years, 1 billion people, and they need increase 6 times the power plants, the capacity, the electricity production capacity. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible, because if we look back, the China had 300,000 megawatts only 40 years ago. And China did this huge jump and increased 6 times. the number of the volume, the capacity of power plants and the electricity sector. So that means that we know from the second wave what could be done in the 30, 40, and even 60 years. And that means that we know that in the next 40, 40, and 60 years, we will see mostly the same progress in the countries from the second, third, and fourth wave. Coming back to this statistic, as I said, the first wave countries started even in 18th century. So they started between 1700 and 1800, because when in 1800 they have an urbanization level around 20%. But second wave countries started around the mid of 20th century. The third wave countries started a little bit later, or maybe they started at the same time, but the progress was a little bit slower. So they're going in a less exponential curve. And the fourth wave countries started at the mid of 20th century. The level was, like I said, 20%, 10%, but for many countries, it was 4%. That means that only 1 or 2 million people were urban dwellers. And at the end of 21st century, the main cities and the main urban dwellers will live in Asia and Africa. And that means this is like the combined graph. I try to show that the countries from the first, second, and fourth, third and fourth waves started urbanization in the different time. But in 2050, you see the interesting thing is that in most countries, from even the third and the fourth waves, the urbanization level will be higher than 50%. And for first and the second waves will be higher than 80%. So that means that urbanization in these first and second wave countries will be finished in the next 30 years. But the interesting thing is, if you look at these third wave countries like South Asia and fourth wave countries from sub-Saharan Africa, you will see then in 30 years, most countries will be more than 50% urbanized. So this is, I think this is a very different understanding of the world you have now. And one important thing is that, because I worked before 2008, I worked in Russian electricity sector. So I understand the electricity sector very, very well. And thankful to Václav Smil and thanks to my experience, I understand the huge important role of electricity for modern civilization. And if you look at the map of sub-Saharan Africa, you will be shocked. Because if you understand that in 2050, 50% from 2 billion people, what the Africa will have, or sub-Saharan Africa will have in this time, 50%, so that means 1 billion people will be urban dwellers. How much electricity do you think these cities are needed? Because cities without electricity are slums. So that means that if they don't have enough electricity, they could not call their cities like a cities. They could call it like, okay, we did something and it's not a cities at all. It's a slum, yeah. Because for population, for urban population, for the country with urban population at the level of 1 billion, you need at least 1 terawatt of installed capacities of power plants. But how many terawatts of installed capacity is now in sub-Saharan Africa? 50,000 megawatts. It's less than on one, it's any country, even small countries in the first wave. That's not amazing, but that's horrible. And I understand that nobody are talking about this jump, what sub-Saharan Africa needs to make in the next 40, 60 years. I'm sure that in the next 30 years, sub-Saharan Africa will get at least the power plants at the level of India today, not less. And then they will need another 2 terawatts in the second half of the 21st century. That is why I could like explain like in details in a big regions in the big zones at the Earth what will happen in the next 80 years, because we understand the main trends and we understand how it should work. And now I will show you another aspect of urbanization. This is the changes in a size of cities, what we will get in the world in the next 60, 80 years. And there are different names, but I like the name for the big cities with a population more than 10 million. The name is the mega cities. And if we look at the number of mega cities in 2010, so 10 years ago, we had 20 mega cities with population more than 10 million. But if you look at 50 years ago, so when the second wave countries started their process of urbanization in 1970, there were only 3 mega cities with a population more than 10 million. And they all are from the first wave countries. But if you look at this map, it's a brilliant map, which could blow in your minds. If you look at this in now 2025, it looks like it's now, yeah. You see that the 20 biggest cities in the world are located in Asia. But you could see that 3 cities are located in North America, like New York, Los Angeles, Mexico City, and the 3 cities are in Brazil. This is Mexico and Brazil are typical countries from the second wave. And but if you look at the Asia, you will see that the biggest city in the world still is Tokyo. It's the first wave countries, but couple biggest cities in China and many bigger cities in India. And we could see that Lagos and Kinshasa, what is these cities? Lagos is the capital of Nigeria, and Kinshasa is the capital of Democratic Republic of Congo. It's the most populous countries in Africa with the main demographic boom speed right now. So these countries will be the biggest, and in terms of demographic boom, and in terms of urbanization, and in terms of demand for everything from electricity to fertilizers to food and so forth, so forth. But if you look at the map in the 2050, go back, yeah, the map of 2050, you will see more cities in India, and a little bit more cities in Africa, and less in Brazil. So only 1 city from Brazil will be inside the 20, the largest. That doesn't mean that the other 2, which disappeared from these 20, decline with the population. They still have a more than 10 million. But in 2050, we will have 50 mega cities with population more than 10 million. So that means that we need to put on the map 50 cities to see all these mega cities. But if you look at the map of mega cities at the end of 21st century, you will be shocked, I'm sure. You see that all cities, mega cities in 2100 will be from India and a little bit Middle East and Africa, and mostly sub-Saharan Africa, like Lagos, Niamey, Kinshasa, Dar es Salaam, and so forth. And these mega cities, the more important issue is the volume of these mega cities. The population of Lagos in 2100 will be around 88 million. So this is not a city. This is a huge country. Even we are thinking now about the countries around the world, you understand that 88 million, this is one of the biggest, maybe this is in the top, for sure this is in the top 30 countries right now. So only one Lagos will have 88. And Kinshasa, number 2 in the 2100, will have 83 million. And Dar es Salaam, the capital of Tanzania, will get 74 million. So this is amazing. And if you look at the 1950, remember, in this particular time, the second wave countries started the mega transition and urbanization process and so forth. In 1950, the population of Lagos was 300,000 citizens, 300,000. And they will be 88 billion in 150 years. This is 150 years transition, which countries from sub-Saharan Africa will make for the next 150 years. And the Dar es Salaam, which will have 74 million, had only 80,000 citizens. 80,000. This is not a city. This is small town, or it's a village. Yeah. So I gave you these figures that you could feel that we are inside one of the most important, huge transition which our humanity is making. This is transition from agrarian to modern era. And in existing world of 8 billion people, only half of this of our population, so 4 billion people, almost, or for 70%, finished this transition. So that means that most part of population from this country are living in a modern world. But another 4 billion from existing 8 billion are living mostly in pre-industrial, in agrarian era. And they will make this mega transition in the next 50, 80 years. And what is more important, and what not more important, but this is important part of my struggling with people who are saying that the main issue of climate change and the main solution for climate change is slowing down the population growth in Africa and India and so forth. No, that's not true. The progress by itself, the mega transition from agrarian era to urban era is the main topic, is the main problem. But it's not a problem because this is a progress. You couldn't say that, okay, let's try to keep these 4 billion people in a country village in agrarian era. Because if they go to urban energy industrialized era, okay, it will make our global problem, our existing global problem, more severe, worse and worse. But we couldn't stop the progress. So that's the main thing. But what's another point is that another 4 or 3 billion people plus to existing 800 to 8 billion will appear in these countries, in the third and the fourth wave countries. So that means that for these countries, by the end of 2100, for sub-Saharan Africa, which now has 1 billion population, and by the end of 21st century, we'll have 4 billion of population, 3+ billion people in this region. They need to urbanize them, to feed them, to give them cities, refrigerators, air conditioners, cars, energy resources. It doesn't matter, it will be solar or it will be oil. Of course, solar is better, but if we go deeper, and I will try to explain you in the next webinar, maybe, if you go deeper, you will understand that the idea of the green transition is so complicated that it shouldn't be so naive that when people say, okay, in 10 years we will see only electric cars in the road. It's not a bullshit. That's a bullshit. You have to understand this topic quite well, because you couldn't say in 10 years everything will be new. The steel production factories will be in hydrogen, and the cement production factories will not pollute the atmosphere and so forth. You need to understand these long-term trends in technosphere, because technosphere is not a gadget. It's not a new iPhone or something like you could change easily and fast. The last, but not least, important aspect of urbanization process I want to share with you is the understanding that this huge mega transition has the leaders, the first wave, the followers like second wave, and the little bit less developed or
later
the third and fourth wave. And that means that I talk mostly about the second and especially third and fourth wave, because these countries will bring to the world the main demand for everything in the next 50, 80 years. That is why I'm sure that we need to double, triple, and increase 10 times or 40 times, or even 100 times. For example, the electricity installed capacity, we need to increase for 100 times in sub-Saharan Africa from existing level. But the important thing is that these countries will make this mega transition, but the first wave countries are facing the new challenges because they're going further. They're the leaders, still the leaders. And the interesting thing is the topic of depopulation and de-urbanization. If you don't understand that the world has these 4 different groups of countries, sometimes you like misunderstand. Okay, we're talking about this urbanization jump and this boom, but from the other side, we're talking about the urbanization and depopulation. What's the truth? But the truth is that we have everything. We have these 2 types of problem in the different countries, in the different waves of countries. So depopulation and the deurbanization, this is a new history, which the countries from the first wave and even from the second wave will face very soon. That means that before this time, for the last 100 years, we had only growth. We had growth in the cities, we had growth in a number of citizens, urban dwellers. We had a demographic growth and everything. But now, from one country to another country, for many countries, we will see a different situation. We will see the declining in number of citizens or in number of urban dwellers. And if you look at this in a long-term perspective, you need to understand that it will change significantly many aspects of the of the life in cities. Because if you have less population, that means that you have empty buildings and sometimes empty districts in the city. And you need to do something with this because you understand that if you have empty buildings, that's bad for safety environment and for many, many other things. And the most dramatic decline we will see in the next, we will see inside the next 30 years will happen in China. That's interesting. China had the hugest urbanization and construction boom in the last 30 years, but at least in the next 20 years, they will have the same rapid decline of population in total and the urban dwellers. And this is the new history for the leaders. And in the time when the certain second wave and the fourth wave countries will continue this mega transition and the urbanization boom, the first wave countries and the second wave countries will go to the new history. They pass the peak and they will go down. I'm not talking about degrowth like the new concept of life, but at least we will see this declining, like the completely new trajectory after the 250 years of growth. We will start to see the declining in different aspects. We will get less energy, maybe less electricity. We will need less steel. We will need less, I don't know, food. But in the first wave countries and in the second wave countries sooner, yeah, and in the third wave countries in 50 years, and in the fourth wave countries in 100 years. So this is all over. It's like a big train which is going from the past to the future, and the leaders, every time the leaders have the new future than the followers, and the followers sometimes copy the path what leaders made for them. But this is our progress. Yeah, and the last small comment I forgot to tell you about that urbanization process is very recent and very new in our human history, and even in the mega transition process, it's a quite new, but it started the new. It is new because before the end of 19th century, people could not build the skyscrapers. The only like buildings what people could build before this, using the old materials like wood and sometimes stones and so forth, they built, of course, the religion like buildings, quite big, yeah, using stones usually. But in most places in the world, people built only houses and like small settlements from wood and sometimes from, I don't know, clay or something like this. But starting the first industrial revolution, the new process started, yeah? The industrialization started to push the deruralization. I couldn't call this process urbanization, like existing, like the process I described before, yeah. But deruralization was the different process. People in the first wave countries, like in England and Germany and France and the United States, people started to move from rural area to the settlements, which started to be built, yeah, around the new factories, like the cotton factories or mills, or like metallurgical factories and so forth. And the second industrial revolution, which started at the beginning of 19th century, accelerated this process because more and more people were needed to work in these factories. And people like to move from the country village because the life in the country village was not great like it looks like today in the US or in Europe, when you look at the country village place and you say, oh, that's a nice place, that's a good environment, fresh air. No, it was not 200 years ago, the good environment, and it was a fresh air, but it was a horrible time. People had to work like every day, 24 hours, and sometimes had a salvation, and sometimes had a draft, and sometimes didn't have a food. So it was a very hard time for centuries. But in the 19th century, many of industrial inventions happened in the first wave countries. And the three inventions were the most important for urbanization. The first, it was the new way of steel production. So it was the blast furnaces, and these blast furnaces using coke. This is a hard coal. Using coke, these companies started to produce a lot of steel. Then the new process of cement production was invented. So the cement was known like for centuries, but you need to build the cities, you need billions of tons of this construction material. And at the end of 19th century, there was invented the process of production of Portland cement, first of all, using natural gas. So the first useful thing what people discovered from natural gas was not to burn it in the power plants, but to melt or to produce cement. And these two new construction materials, steel and cement and pig iron, like a previous stage of a steel melting, gave the chance to produce the reinforced concrete. So this is the most important construction material what our world has now. And using this reinforced concrete, people started to build the skyscrapers. And the first skyscraper was built in Chicago in 1895. It was 10 floors building, but it was the biggest building in the world this time. So, and after that, the cities started to grow like mushrooms, yeah, to the heavens, to the top. And the third important invention, what happened at the end of 19th century, was the transportation. Public transportation and passengers' cars, they gave a chance to spread the cities around in a huge area. Like wow, Los Angeles is one of the biggest city in terms of the area. It's like a huge plate. If you don't have transportation, you couldn't build these cities. So, and these three technologies at the end of 19th century changed significantly the way how we started to build our like environment or like our habitat for people. And that is important story about the role of innovations and technologies. Yeah, maybe I will finish at this point.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. So when I listened to you, I was in the mood. When I remember one story when I was young, when I was a kid. My father told me I can't go with him, but I tried again and again to ask he should go with me. And then, you know, you have a line when you're asking something and you still believe he will change his mind, he will change his opinion, but it's not gonna happen. And then you realize it's not happen, and then you're like in the shock as a child. And I remember this feeling because I really want to go with him. And this shock create a lot of energy, the same time a lot of frustration. And you know, when technology optimists they talking about, oh, we will won this war and we will save the planet, at least we can create some blockbusters about how we save the planet.
Yeah. That's easier.
Yeah. That's unfortunately much more easier than the real save. But at the end of the day, we should realize this kind of answer, yeah, for our question. Can we save our a planet? Or as you mentioned in the first webinar, can we save not the planet itself, but our way how we are living and the standards of the life? And it's real changed even in the first wave countries, as you mentioned, and not only in the third and fourth wave. So we are there like a child in the process of understanding and accepting this answer and accepting all these uh, uh, mega transitions results, or let's say what it's really mean for us. And Alexander, I have one question for you. Maybe it's too naive again, a question, but do you think the cities in the third and fourth wave countries still will be built under all these technologies what existed now? Or you think we have chance to at least like a 10%, 20%, half of the percent of these buildings built with some new materials, some maybe nanomaterial, so it will be easier, more lighter cement or more stronger steel or less electricity need to cool the cities. So you think is no chance to reduce this influence of the current methods, or we still have some chance?
Because I spent several years on the stock market,
Yeah.
I know some slangs, and there is one of the best phrase I know from the stock market and from the investor bankers. Are you on the buy side or on the sell side? It's very depend, because I remember like I participated in one presentation what the one of the guru of financial market in the US gave last year, and he showed these prospectus. He didn't collect all the necessary data, but nevertheless, he showed the perspective of the demographic growth in many countries by the end of 21st century. And he said, you need to see which countries will grow more, because that means that this is the most rapid growing market for everything. Yeah. You could sell to these people food, cement, concrete, cities, technologies, nanotechnologies, new innovations like new kind of cement, because this is the demographic boom. This is the main driver for the progress. When you have this population growth from 2 million people to 200 million, you understand that the only topic what everybody are talking, making money, trading something, make some money, make the GDP growth, the economy growth. So that means that in terms of progress, what I described now looks fantastic, because that means that another 4 billion people plus 3 new billion people, so 7 billion people has a chance in the next 70 years will go from the agrarian era to modern era. This is amazing opportunity for everybody, from innovators and inventors, venture capitalists, and so forth. But if you understand that the African progress will happen not in 200 years, it is happening right now. And every year they accelerate their progress. That means that they need to build enough steel factories and cement producers and the fertilizers, and because right now they don't have time to wait for your clean technologies for meat production, for cement production, or Tesla or Toyota hydrogen cars and so forth. They are buying existing technologies. And the problem is, and Václav Smil is one of my favorite experts in this field, because he is engineer. He's not like a philosopher or economist. He's engineer. And he mentioned every time that when you are talking about industrial technologies, industrial infrastructure, technosphere, you have to forget about like something miracle that, okay, in a couple of years it will change. No, this is very capital intensive infrastructure. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of time to build something new. Even if we have the new, let's propose that we have right now the new zero pollution technology for cement production. We produce 4 billion tons of cement every year right now. So that means that we have a lot of facilities in all countries in the world, except in sub-Saharan Africa, and not enough cement companies in India, for example. But even if we have it, we need to spread them, first of all, in the third and fourth wave countries, because they need to build these factories right now. And of course, if we bring them the new technology, and these technologies really work very well, very stable, very, they could buy it. And it should be cheaper than existing, yeah, of course. Because if you buy something new, you understand, you expect that usually it's much more expensive. And maybe somebody from the, I don't know, World Bank or something like this, they will give you the subsidy, they will, or feed-in tariff, they will take this difference between existing technology and the new zero polluting technologies on them. It's okay. But then we need to replace all existing companies. And as I said, investors will not be happy if you say, okay, you need to close these factories, these power plants, because this is new. They invested billions of dollars. Who will pay for this? So this is very complicated. That is why I'm very pessimistic for the next 50 years about the progress in climate change fighting. But at the same time, I'm sure that we need to fight, that we need to create this war room and this long-term plan. But it's not about climate. Because you see, the most important thing we are talking about is not the climate, is the progress for the whole humanity. We need to help these 7 billion people to go from the zero, from the poor stage when they are now, to the prosper world, what the countries like the US and Europe has. And we need to help to build the prosperity for all 11 billion people at the end of this century. And we need not to destroy biosphere on this way. So this is the complicated challenge for us. And it takes, I'm sure it takes not less than 100 years. But I believe that if we create this program, if we could implement this program year by year by year for the next 100 years, at the beginning of 22nd century, our grandkids and grandkids will tell us thank you for what we've done. Because in 22nd century, there is a chance that we could see the world of a sustainable development, but not during this way. We couldn't be sustainable because we are totally unstable right now. We need to find a balance in this turbulence time, because we need to change everything. We need to replace oil. We need to replace fertilizers. We need to replace steel or coke from a steel production process. We need to replace all kind of natural gas burning technologies, from power plants to cement production and fertilizer production. And it's a huge, and optimists are thinking about the world in 5 years, like everything will be changed and everything will be clean. It doesn't work. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. Sorry for my long answer for the short question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alexander. So as you mentioned, you will describe more detailed insights about the energy.
Yeah, the next webinars will be about energy and about climate change, the roots of climate change, and the so-called solutions for climate change. And I will be a little bit more critical, like most of official speakers on these topics. But I think we need to have another point of view on all of these complicated issues.
Okay. Thank you, Alexander, for the webinar, and see you next time within 2 weeks.
With pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.